They call it CoffeeScript combined. Take a sip, I know it's quite a trip, 'cause somehow you can write less code to get more done. Yeah! Come on and take a seat, don't end up obsolete. They call it CoffeeScript. Yeah.
Alright, you're halfway done with the course. Now we're on to level 4, where we're going to be talking about arrays, objects, and iteration. So in CoffeeScript we have these things called ranges, right? So we can say range 1.4, and that's going to translate into the JavaScript of just 1, 2, 3, 4 in an array. We can also say range 1.4, so that's 3 dots, which is going to give us an array with everything but the last item. So it's just going to be 1, 2, 3 in JavaScript. This may not seem very powerful. Where it starts to get more powerful is when you realize that you can use it with variables and to get subsets of existing arrays. So here we have two variables. We have a start and an end. So it's going to create an array with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Then we can get a subset of that array by just doing 1.4. That's going to return 6, 7, 8, and 9. We could get a range from 1 with 3 dots to range.length, so we would get from the second item to the end of the array. We could also write this with just range 1.1. So when we do -1, it will wrap around from the front to the very last item. To create a basic array in CoffeeScript, you can either do the normal sort of array syntax you see here, but you can also take out the commas if you use the proper spacing. So here you can see we have store locations, Orlando, Winter Park, and Sanford, just like that. Now let's talk a little bit about looping through the array we just created. So we can obviously just do a for each loop. That's going to translate from CoffeeScript into JavaScript like so. Pretty basic, nothing amazing there. However, it's much more common in CoffeeScript to not do a for each and do something that looks a little bit more like this. We have for location in store locations. So it's going to go through each of the items in the store locations array, set it equal to location every time it iterates through the loop, and then call alert on it. So we should have 3 different alerts. If we wanted to, we could also move this for loop to the end of the line. So we could say alert location, for location, and store locations. There's another word for this. It's called a list comprehension. Let's take a look at a couple more list comprehensions. So what if we wanted to add comma FL for each of those cities in our array? Well, we could write it like this. So we have our interpolated string for location in store locations, and that would be the array that it returns for us. If we wanted to overwrite our original array, we want to write it like this. The parentheses here are really important. Keep that in mind. If we didn't have the parentheses around the list comprehension, it would set store location equal to Orlando, then Winter Park, then Sanford. So the result would be store locations equals Sanford, right? But because we have the parentheses there, it's going to build the array and then send that array into the variable we declared. Another list comprehension example, if we wanted to call the geolocate function on each of our store locations except for the Sanford location, we could say for location in store locations when location isn't Sanford. That's called a filter, and you can put any sort of expression after a filter. What if we wanted to create a new array, a brand new array, without Sanford? How would we do that? Well, one way we could do that is like this, basically iterating through each item, push that onto our brand new array, and we would have, a new array without Sanford. However, let's use a list comprehension. So we could also do this by doing location for location in store locations when location isn't Sanford. Now I know this might look a little bit confusing. Feel free to pause the video and let it absorb. But all this is saying is return location for each location where location isn't Sanford. So it's going to return an array that doesn't include the Sanford location. Next up, let's talk about using splats in CoffeeScript. It's a fun name, and we use it for when we want to have a variable number of parameters sent into a function, or send a variable number of parameters into a function. Let me explain. So here we have a function called search locations. You can see we have the ... in the parameters. Now, we can call that function using 2 parameters. We would get this returned. We can also call this function using 3 parameters, or 4 parameters, or 5 parameters. You can see here that it's basically taking whatever parameters are after the first one and combining them into an array, which we are then joining inside of that string. Not only can splats be used in the definition of a function, but you can also use them to call a function. Let me show you. You see here we have a parameter array of the parameters. Well, we can send in those parameters into our search location function, and these 2 lines are basically equivalent. Next up, let's talk about objects, which you're probably already familiar with, the term, JavaScript objects, where you have a key and you have a value. In some languages, we call these hashes. So here is an object inside CoffeeScript, pretty basic. Optionally, we can remove the curly braces. We can do it without the curly braces. And if we want to, we can even get rid of a comma. So if we write it in a spaced out way with 2 spaces in this case, we can avoid the commas. In jQuery Air Captain's log, we covered how to encapsulate a function inside of an object. Here's how we might do that in CoffeeScript. You'll notice here that I'm using the @ symbol here. So @name, that's going to reference the value French in this case. We can call this function by just doing coffee.brew. And here's the JavaScript that it's going to generate for us. Let's add one more function to our coffee object. We're going to call it pour. It's going to have a default parameter of 1 for amount. And that's all there is to it. Here's the JavaScript that's going to generate for that particular function. It should be said that you need to be careful with your indenting when you're doing CoffeeScript. Obviously, indenting matters a lot. For example, if I didn't get the indenting right with this object, here's the JavaScript that it would render out. Let's take a look at a more complex object, maybe an object that has other objects inside of it. So here you can see I have a bunch of different coffees. Inside each of those coffees, they has the strength of that coffee and how many I have in stock. If I wanted to see how much Italian I have in stock, I would use this command right here. Here's the JavaScript that the CoffeeScript is going to compile into. Now let's play with that object. What if we wanted to iterate through that object, printing out certain things? Could we use a list comprehension? Well, we can, although it'll look slightly different. So we're going to print out the coffee and then the number we have in stock. We're going to iterate through each of them, storing the key in coffee and the rest of the object in attributes. You'll notice that of keyword there, when we were doing list comprehension with arrays, it had in instead of of. When we want to iterate through an object, we use the of keyword and specify 2 variables that we want to store the key and the value in every time it iterates through things in that object. Here's what this would print out. Another way we could write this loop is by doing something like this. Now what if we wanted to print this out nicely, the string we're creating here, but we didn't want to include any of the coffees that don't have anything in stock? What might that look like? We might do something like this, where we have a toPrint variable. You'll notice here we're doing when attributes.inStock greater than 0, so we're using a filter. And at the very bottom, we're joining the array together, so we would get French has 20, Italian has 12. If you take a look at the JavaScript that's generated from this CoffeeScript, well, it's longer and it's not very pretty. So you can start to see some of the beautiful code that CoffeeScript allows us to write. We don't have to write any of this extra stuff to do something that we can explain using less code to get more done. And that's about it. We've reached the end of level 4. It's time to get into the challenges, maybe do some arrays, some objects, and some list comprehensions.